Thursday, February 28th, 1993. A small-town preacher running a religious compound in Waco, Texas, quickly found himself in the middle of a 51-day siege with the FBI, following one of the most televised and disastrous law enforcement raids in American history, creating a barricade situation courtesy of the ATF. FBI negotiators pleaded with the preacher to peacefully exit the compound and surrender, but the FBI quickly learned the man was far from a preacher. He was a deranged cult leader, a self-proclaimed messiah destined to bring the world to end times. And through his dictatorship and weaponization of the Bible, he manipulated and had prepared his followers to fight a holy war against the beasts of Babylon. In 1981, 22-year-old Vernon Howell makes his way to Waco, Texas. His dreams of one day becoming a famous rock star were well over, after failing to form a band in Los Angeles. And for the aspiring lead singer, it was a boy's last dream and a man's first loss. And like most young men tasting their first drop of reality, Vernon Howell was in need of guidance and embarked on a spiritual adventure, resorting back to the one thing he was ever good at: his knowledge of the Bible, to which he reportedly memorized by the age of 14. He discovered like-minded individuals from a fairly new religious movement and splinter group of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who called themselves the Branch Davidians. He camped out at the group's compound in Waco, the Mount Carmel Center, owned and ran by a George Roden. And over the next 4 years, using his outsider rock and roll persona, people took a liking to Howell, especially the women, even having an affair with Roden's 60-year-old mother, causing such an uproar that Vernon Howell had to flee Mount Carmel Center altogether. And to his surprise, he was followed. Realizing the power he wielded over his fellow Branch Davidians, the covert narcissist, with the same audacity and entitlement to pursue a career as a rock star, pivoted his misguided ego to the lead role within the Branch Davidians. And by 1987, he turned his followers into an armed militia, declaring the Mount Carmel Center was his for the taking, and his rival and the reigning king of the Branch Davidians, George Roden, was in his way. And on November 3rd of 1987, Vernon Howell led an armed group of men into Waco, attacking the Mount Carmel Center. A firefight ensued, and the gun battle lasted for nearly 45 minutes. While firing hundreds of rounds in the middle of a gun battle, Vernon Howell was preaching to his followers, and even shouting scripture directed at Roden. Roden was shot in the finger and was reportedly the only person injured. Vernon Howell and all 8 of his accomplices were rounded up by the sheriffs and indicted on charges for attempted murder. All 9 were tried in a state court, and all 9 were acquitted by a jury. After Vernon Howell's release, George Roden vacated the Mount Carmel Center. Howell paid the property taxes owed and took over, becoming the newfound leader of the Branch Davidians. And under Howell's leadership, the sect of Branch Davidians became reborn into something new altogether. Howell and his followers collected abandoned vehicles, recycled building materials, and acquired an FFL license, selling firearms at gun shows. The money earned was invested back into the community to build bunkers on top of bunkers to further fortify the Mount Carmel compound. And an even larger portion of the money was invested into more firearms to stockpile and increase their inventory for future buyers, and as well as an inventory for themselves.
Wrath and vexing toward his pleasure. People are fixing to get an ass kicking.
And by weaponizing the words of the gospel, Howell began decaying the souls of his followers, self-proclaiming that he himself was God in the flesh, the chosen one to interpret the 7 seals of Revelation, pushing an apocalyptic, messianic agenda within the sect, prophesizing his will to bring the universe to end times, resurrecting and initiating the second coming of Jesus Christ. He would change his name to David after King David, and take the surname of Koresh after Cyrus the Conqueror, and the Branch Davidians worshipped their leader, David Koresh. And he began to control every aspect of their lives, from declaring which foods they could eat, to which mothers were fit for motherhood, even claiming through a divine mandate that he must take the wives of other men as his own, and that all other marriages are to be dissolved, and commanding all men within the Branch Davidians to remain single and remain celibate. And through his dictatorship, his abuse, and taking teenagers as wives, the line was drawn in the sand, and those who were against him fled, such as a group of Australian defectors who went to Australian authorities after returning to their native country. And soon after, an Australian news reporter arrived in Waco to question its members.
Well, a lot of very serious allegations have been made against him and this place. Have you heard those allegations?
No. Not that I could.
Allegations that people here are frightened of him, of his behaviour.
Oh no, I'm not frightened of him.
Yeah?
Nuh-uh.
What about the girl next to you? What do you think of David?
I think he's great.
Yeah, how old are you?
I'm 16.
16?
The master manipulator prepared his followers for the so-called Great Battle between the faithful and the beasts of Babylon. David Koresh prepped food, taught survivalism, and prepared his followers for war. And as the sheriffs were notified by UPS employees of a package containing grenades and explosive powders, the Great War was coming. As the ATF were notified and giving Koresh his violent history, information pertaining to reports of automatic gunfire coming from the Mount Carmel Center, the ATF locked in on David and began snooping around for any and all taxable weapons, even sending in undercover Special Agent Robert Rodriguez, who reported that David Koresh was using drop-in sears to convert semi-automatic rifles to full auto, according to the affidavit. The arrest warrant on David Koresh and the search warrant on the Mount Carmel Center was signed by a judge on February 25th, and the ATF planned a raid that would go down in infamy. And on February 28th, the day of the raid, a tipped-off news reporter on his way to cover the inbound ATF raid stopped and asked a stranger for directions to the Mount Carmel Center, mentioning the ATF spectacle that was soon to be taking place. The stranger whom he stopped was David Koresh's brother-in-law, a Branch Davidian, who fled back to the compound to warn the others of the incoming raid. The Davidians armed themselves and took defensive positions against what they interpreted as the beasts of Babylon. The agents arrived hidden within the back of cattle trucks and began their offensive positions against what they interpreted as the religious group with illegal guns and a history of gun violence. And regardless of the psychologies or theologies of either side, both sides put their quarter in the jukebox. The ATF agents hit the ground running, effecting a dynamic entry to capture David Koresh and execute the search warrant. But instead of hitting the Davidians with the element of surprise, gunfire erupted, and whether or not it was the ATF or the Branch Davidians who shot first, all hell broke loose. The Branch Davidians were firing from over 40 different shooting positions. Agents on the ground became pinned down by a barrage of automatic gunfire. A diversion of helicopters arrived, attempting to fly low over the complex as a distraction, but the Branch Davidians shot at the helicopters, and the helicopters were forced to land. Running ladders on the east side of the building, the ATF forced themselves upon the compound, making entry into the building from the roof, walking straight in to a close-quarter battle. The realization sank in that the agents were failing. Half of the team were attempting to enter the compound, business as usual, sticking to the plan. As for the other half, they were pinned down, contagiously shooting at the building with no direction or purpose, recklessly endangering the women and children. A Branch Davidian by the name of Wayne Martin dialed 911.
Hello? Hello? Hello. Yeah, this is Lieutenant Lynch. May I help you? Yeah, there's 75 men around our building, and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel? Yeah, tell them there are children and women in here and to call it off.
Lieutenant Larry Lynch of the McLennan County Sheriff's Office jumped on the line and hailed ATF agents via radio.
I'm talking with Wayne now. He's inside. They want everybody to back off and talk. I'm trying to get what radio frequency. They told me the radio van. We're not getting a response.
During this time, Deputy Director of the ATF, Dan Hartnett, contacted Washington, D.C., requesting the assistance of FBI negotiators on the scene in Waco. FBI special agents from a nearby field office responded to the scene. And after nearly 2 hours of shooting, and around the same time ATF agents began to run low on ammo, negotiators secured a ceasefire. A wounded David Koresh, shot in the wrist and stomach, ordered the Branch Davidians to hold their fire. The ATF extracted 18 of their own who were severely wounded, 4 of which were killed in action. The Branch Davidians recovered 5 of their dead, and it's reported up to 20 Branch Davidians were wounded as a result of the shootout. And the Davidians began to bunker down and barricade inside the compound, believing full well that these were the end times that their leader David Koresh had prophesized. And the ATF, knowing full well that they royally fucked up, handed over the crisis to the FBI.
My name is Jeff Jamar. I'm the special agent in charge of the FBI in the San Antonio division, and I'm the special agent in charge of FBI operations here in Waco.
Can you tell us, in talking with Koresh, have you any indication how many people in the compound are dead, how many are wounded, what their condition is?
The people we're talking to say 3 people wounded, to include Koresh. The extent of wounds, we don't know. The extent of his wounds, we don't know.
Channel 13, Eyewitness News, tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. A fanatical, scripture-quoting religious
cult
leader
actually
who
called
Waco
or known as
the
the Branch Davidians
Instead,
is an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They broke off from the church and moved out here from Los Angeles back in 1935. But despite the longevity of the cult in and around the Waco area, very few Waco residents that we spoke with had ever even heard of this cult before today.
All across America, all eyes were on Waco. And not even 5 hours after the ceasefire, another Branch Davidian was killed. A man by the name of Michael Schroeder, who had been working during the raid and tried sneaking past ATF agents to return to his people. When he was spotted by ATF snipers and confronted on the ground, agents report that Schroeder was armed with a Glock 19 and opened fire. He was shot 7 times, and his body was left where it fell for 5 days.
How many gunshots did you hear?
It was quite a few, you know. I couldn't really say how many it was, but he knew it was something that wasn't normal.
But the FBI was certain nobody else needed to be harmed, and the negotiations with David Koresh began.
How could we save these children and women and...
Give me the coverage.
Okay, I'm going to get your scripture message to the radio station right away.
David refused to surrender, but bargained with negotiators to release 2 children every time they air his message of how God gave him the ability to unlock the 7 seals of Revelation and start the apocalypse via Dallas radio news station KRLD.
My name is Dave Koresh. I'm speaking to you from Mount Carmel Center. First thing that I would like to introduce in our subject is the reasons for the revelation of Jesus Christ.
Over the next 10 days, David consistently released an inconsistent number of both women and children after each broadcast of his sermon.
It's nothing other than my name is Dave, the revelation of Jesus Christ.
21 children have been released since the standoff began February 28th. Most came out with messages from their parents listing relatives that might take them.
And basking in the glory of the third act of his self-proclaimed prophecy, David refused to surrender, believing wholeheartedly that these were the end times.
He gave us his word that after the message was delivered.
Yes, but what if there is a higher power than you and I that speaks to an individual? If there's a God in this universe, and there's the laws of man and there's the laws of God, and this God that has led him all his life says to him to wait, what do you do?
David Koresh, pick up the phone. Negotiators attempting to get a hold of you. They're like to speak with you.
The FBI grew impatient and began to implement aggressive tactics, beginning with a PSYOP to prevent the Branch Davidians from sleeping, to entice them to surrender. David had a revelation, informing negotiators the end times were no longer coming, and that once he was done penning his manuscript, interpreting the 7 seals, he would come out and surrender with the rest of the children. However, officials reportedly grew concerned after having learned from Texas Rangers of abuse reported by the released children during a series of interviews. United States Attorney General Janet Reno and then President Bill Clinton agreed that getting the remaining children out of the Mount Carmel Center was the #1 priority, even if it meant another tactical resolution.
David, individuals inside the Branch Davidian compound. We are in the process of placing tear gas into the building. Exit the compound now. Submit to the proper authority, David.
Authorities used tanks to deploy the tear gas, at which point the Branch Davidians opened fire. Wiretaps revealed the Davidians were also pouring some type of fuel inside the compound. As different as they were, both sides had so much in common. Both sides endangering the children. Both sides shallow and clueless. Both sides playing God. And a simple lesson in history will teach you: you can't play God without creating hell.
Gonna stay out in the cold, where it never gets old. Gonna burn out slowly, with my silver and gold. Turn my life into a circus, go from town to town. To see, I'm both a lion and clown. What if we start over? Get a second chance.
76 Branch Davidians perished in the fire, 27 of which were children.
They cannot be proud about what they did on April the 19th.
The events at the Mount Carmel Center sparked both outrage, criminal prosecutions, and civil litigations. Congress held extensive hearings into charges that federal law enforcement officials made serious mistakes.
Earlier in an opening I gave this morning with regard to the Posse Comitatus Act, just to refresh my colleagues' memories, the Posse Comitatus statute is a criminal statute that states that it's a crime to use any part of the Army or Air Force to enforce the laws of the land unless authorized by Congress or the Constitution.
Including the affidavit, which failed to establish probable cause, and the use of pyrotechnic tear gas, which under the right conditions can become extremely flammable. Attorney General Reno defended her actions before the FBI's assault on the cult's compound. Reno was adamant that she alone had made the decision to force the cult leader David Koresh and his followers out of their compound with CS tear gas. and later denied all allegations of the use of pyrotechnics.
I am very, very troubled by the information I received this week suggesting that pyrotechnic devices may have been used in the early morning hours on April the 19th, 1993 at Waco.
However, several munitions of pyrotechnics were recovered from the rubble. Several experts who testified at the hearings stated that the fire was a premeditated decision by the Davidians to burn down the compound and themselves, likely at the orders David Koresh, and the public demanded answers.
Nobody wants to admit that their government could possibly be guilty of such a thing, but based on what I found out here over the past 5 months, I have no choice but to say that they were.
And the tragedy of Waco echoed into the streets of Oklahoma City.
I guess somebody told me a lot of people are scared to put something on there, like this.
And whether or not the fire was caused by the authorities or the Davidians, the real question is, was it worth it? Was it worth showing off to prove a point? The ATF could have simply grabbed David Koresh somewhere in town, but elected to raid, creating a crisis within a crisis. And nothing in life is worth risking the life of a child. And if there's one thing that those in charge can remember and learn from Waco, it's to ask themselves before acting, is the juice worth the squeeze? Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. There's a lot more of these mini documentaries in the works, and you don't want to miss them. So make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.